We're going to be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, verse number 10. Smaran Vishwasrajam Isho Vijñapitam Adokshajaha Virajam Atapatsvena Tejasaishang Vivruttaye Smaran Vishwasrajam Isho Vijñapitam Adokshajaha Virajam Atapatsvena Tejasaishang Vivruttaye. Pratima Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Smaram, remembering Vishwasrijam of the demigods entrusted with the task of cosmic construction, Ishaha, the Supreme Lord, Vignapitam, as he was prayed for, Adokshajaha, the transcendence, Virajam, the gigantic universal form, Atapat, considered thus, Shena, by his own, Tejasa, energy, Yesham, for this, Vivrittaye, for understanding. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Translation and purports by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Supreme Lord is the super soul of all the demigods, entrusted with the task of constructing the cosmic manifestation. Being thus prayed to by the demigods, he thought to himself and thus manifested the gigantic form for their understanding. Now we see that in the previous chapter, there is the prayers of the demigods, where they are praying to the Lord as to that we have been created. Now, please give us the instruction or the knowledge by which as to how we need to execute the purpose for which we have been created. That is one. They are also asking the Lord to give them the potency for them to perform such activity. So, both these instructions in terms of what should be done and the energy for which, the empowerment by which they could do it, is what they had prayed for. And so, as an answer to those prayers, we can see that the Lord has manifested himself as the universal form. And that is the description that we are seeing in this particular chapter. So, the Supreme Lord is the super soul of all the demigods, entrusted with the task of constructing the cosmic manifestation. Being thus prayed to by the demigods, he thought to himself and thus manifested the gigantic form for their understanding. Purport: the impersonalists are captivated by the gigantic universal form of the Supreme. They think that the control behind the gigantic manifestation is an imagination. Intelligent persons, however, can estimate the value of the cause by observing the wonders of the effects. And it's a very interesting point Srila Prabhupada makes. What does he say? He says, for people who don't know, I used to give this example of if you are in Dubai and if you're looking at the metro train, everything is going on so nicely. And yet there is no driver sitting in the train. For that person who does not know about the automation of how this works, might in illusion think that, oh, this is all some magic, somebody is creating some magic, something is happening. But actually, if one goes behind this and sees, they can see that there is a control center, and then there is a person sitting in front of that control center and who is operating the whole thing under the instructions of a certain supervisor, right? And then everything is going on so nicely. They know exactly which train is moving and how it should move, when it should open the door, when the door has to be closed, and so on and so forth. Only a person who is in knowledge is aware of this thing. A person who is not in knowledge thinks this is all some kind of a magic. In a similar way, here he says, the ones who are impersonalists, who are captivated and who cannot, when I say captivated, which means that when they are in illusion about the gigantic form of the Supreme Lord, not understanding that he is supreme, they think it is just some imagination. However, an intelligent person can estimate the value of the cause. How? Simply by seeing the effect. When one sees the effect, when we get up, come to the the dining table, and you see that there is a feast of 56 items made, chapan bhog is made and offered. Only a fool will think that these all came by magic, right? A person who's intelligent, he will understand, oh, so many items, how were they created? Right? Somebody should have gone for shopping meticulously, knowing exactly what items should have been done, where to buy them, go buy those articles, put them in the kitchen, and then get up early in the morning and prepare all of those items, and then make the cooking, and then get these items ready, and then it comes to the table. Only a fool will think that everything comes to the table. Today, that is why most people are in so much illusion, right? They don't know what is going behind in the kitchen. They think just like when you go to the hotel and you order for something and it just appears in the table, everything should appear from the kitchen. The hard work of the whoever is cooking, the matajis or the pitajis, whoever is cooking, right? They don't understand that. They simply think that, oh, just like in a hotel, oh, I ordered for this. Okay. And when it comes, when they taste it, because they're so used to tasting it, their taste buds are used to tasting things in the hotel in a certain way. Every time they go, they have the same taste. Why? Because they have some food additives or chemicals there which make them taste in a certain way. And they're expecting the same thing at home. That's the problem. One of the reasons a lot of husbands or whoever is eating is dissatisfied. They've had a certain uh, you know taste that they have developed by eating outside constantly, right? Because these days nobody eats at home. They all go early to the office and take breakfast in the canteen there itself, and then there is lunch there. Sometimes they also finish the dinner and come. And once in a while, when they eat at home, they expect that the taste should be exactly the same, like how they are preparing in the hotel or in the canteen. That is not. It's not that it is not possible at home, but that is not something that is very healthy at home, because in the hotels they prepare it in a certain way that it looks like, oh, it is nice, right? Anyways, coming back to this, so we understand that these impersonalists are sometimes simply imagining or illusorily thinking that it is just an imagination, but in reality there is somebody who is behind this. For example, the individual human body does not develop from the womb of the mother independently, but because the living entity, the soul, is within the body. If there was no life, then it doesn't develop. So, without the living entity, a material body cannot automatically take shape or develop. When any material object displays development, it is automatically to be understood that there is life in it. Like, for example, we don't know by any scope that we are looking inside. If you have a plant at home in your balcony, right? Mataji has, Vishwajit Prabhu has so many plants in his balcony. How do you know that this plant is living? Every day morning, when you see a flower or when the new leaf is coming out of it, then you see, oh, there is life inside this plant. Otherwise, you see that you don't know whether the life is there. Sometimes, when due to heavy sun, if a plant is dying, right, you don't understand, oh, whether there is still life or not. I don't see any symptoms of leaf because all the leaves have fallen, but there is still life inside, because when the weather changes, again the leaves come out. So, which means the life is still there, by which we can understand that there is life in that particular entity. In a similar way, right, if there was no life, nothing will develop. So, by the effect, one can understand that there is a cause to it in a similar way. So, the gigantic universe has developed gradually, just as the body of a child develops. The conception that the transcendence enters within the universe is therefore logical, as the materialists cannot find the soul and the super soul within the heart. Similarly, for want of sufficient knowledge, they cannot see that the supreme soul is the cause of the universe. The Lord is therefore described in the Vedic language as Avan Manasa Gocharaha, beyond the conception of words and minds. Due to a poor fund of knowledge, the mental speculators try to bring the supreme within the purview of words and minds, but the Lord refuses to be so intelligible. He says, but the Lord refuses to be so intelligible. Atasri Krishna Namadi na bhaved grahyam indriya. These indriyas that we have, which are material, they cannot grasp or digest, the form, the qualities, and all of those things. Grahyam, one cannot, grasp it within their, imperfect material senses because of their being unintelligible. right? And so the speculator has no adequate words or mind to gauge the infinity of the Lord. Just like how the Dr. Frog in the well thinks of everything in terms of the well, the size of the well, whether the Atlantic Ocean is 5 times that of the well or the 10 times of the well. You cannot measure the ocean into ace, even if you multiply it by 1,000 or 10,000 times, right? So the Lord is called Adoksaja, or the person who is beyond perception by the blunt, limited potency of our senses. One cannot perceive the transcendental name or form of the Lord by mental speculation. The mundane PhDs are completely unable to speculate on the Supreme with their limited senses. Such attempts by the puffed up PhDs are compared to the philosophy of the frog in the well. Prabhupada gives that example. He says, the frog in the well was informed of the gigantic Pacific Ocean, and he began to puff himself up in order to understand or measure the length and breadth of the Pacific Ocean. Ultimately, the frog burst and died. The title PhD can also be interpreted as plow department, a title meant for the tillers in the paddy field. The attempt of the tillers in the paddy field to understand the cosmic manifestation and the cause behind such wonderful work can be compared to the endeavor of the frog in the well to calculate the measurement of the Pacific Ocean. The Lord cannot reveal himself only to a person who is submissive. Sorry, the Lord can reveal himself only to a person who is submissive and who engages in his transcendental loving service. So he says, Shevon Mukehi Jihvadav Swayameva Spuratyada. That is, if one person is engaged in his transcendental loving service, Swayameva Spuratyada, automatically he reveals himself to that person. That is the nature of the Supreme Lord. So the demigods controlling the elements and the ingredients of universal affairs prayed to the Lord for guidance, and thus he manifested his gigantic form as he did at the request of Arjuna. Text number 11. Ata tasyabhitaptasya katidhayatananih nirabidyanta devana tani me ghadatah shrunu. Malamataji, yes.
Hare Krishna. Atha, therefore, tasya his abhitaptasya, in terms of his contemplation, kaditha, how many ayatanas the nirabityanta, by separated parts, devanam, of the demigods, thani, all those, me gadataha, described by me, shunu, just here. Hare Krishna.
Translation. Maitreya said, you may now hear from me how the Supreme Lord separated himself into the diverse forms of the demigods after the manifestation of the gigantic universal. So now Maitreya Muni is further describing into the expansions of how the universal form of the Lord manifested himself for the various functions. The demigods are separated parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, as are all other living entities. The only difference between the demigods and the ordinary living entities is that when the living entities are rich in pious acts of devotional service to the Lord, and when their desire to lord it over material energy has vanished, they are promoted to the posts of demigods. Which means the ordinary living entities and the demigods are same in that sense that they are parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. However, when an ordinary living entity increases his piety and, more importantly, decreases his desire to lord it over material energy, then he becomes a demigod who acts under the direct instruction of the Lord. So they are promoted to the post of demigods who are entrusted by the Lord with executing the management of the universal affairs. Text number 12. Tasyagnir asyam nirbhinnam lokapalo vishat padam vacha swangshena vaktavyam yayasho pratipadyate. Arti Mataji.
Hare Prabhu. Tasya, his, Agnihi, fire, Ashyam, mouth, Nirbhinnam, thus separated, Lokapalaha, the directors of material affairs, Avishat, entered, Padam, respective position, Vacha, by words, Swa Amshena, by one's own part, Vaktavyam, speeches, Yaya, by which, Ashau, they, Pratipadyate, express. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Translation: Agni or heat separated from his mouth, and all the directors of material affairs entered into it in their respective positions. By that energy, the living entity expresses himself in words. The mouth of the gigantic universal form of the Lord is the source of the speaking power. The director of the fire element is the controlling deity or the Adidhaiva. The speeches delivered are Adhyatma or bodily functions, and the subject matter of the speeches is material productions or the Adibhuta principle. So now the first separation, or as to how he produced uh, uh, the power of words, or the ability for one to express himself in words. How did it come? It came from the fire. That's why when we see that when there is severe cold and when you are trying to say something, right, your words are trembling. You cannot say the word that you want to say because of intense cold. So what is that? There should be a good balance of fire within the body if one has to speak. If there is no fire in the body, that's why in sales they say you got to have the fire in the belly. You need to deliver it like in a very uh, powerful way. So you need to have that strength. So one needs to have the fire if one has to. So the controlling deity of that speech is the fire element in the thing. So that is the one that is being described here. So the director of the fire element is the controlling deity or the Adideva. The speeches delivered is Adhyatma, and the subject matter of the speeches is material productions or the Adibhuta. So in the ability to speak itself, there are three things. What are the three things? There is the speech itself, and then the subject matter of the speech, and then the one who empowers the speech. And who are they? There are Adidhaiva, Adhyatma, and Adibhuta. So that is the. So for every one of the activity, you can find there is Adidhaiva, there is an Adhyatma, and there is an Adibhuta. Nirbinnam thalu varuno lokapalo vishad dharehe jihva yamsena cha rasam yayasho pratipadyate.
Hare Krishna, Dandot Pranams.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna. Nirbinnam, separated. Thalu, palette. Varunaha, the deity controlling water. Lokapalaha, director of the planets. Avishat, entered. Harihi, of the Lord. Jihvaya, Amshena, with the part of the tongue. Cha, also. Some taste. Yaya, by which. Ashau, the living entity. Pratipadyate, expresses. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. When the palette of the gigantic form was separately manifested, Varuna, the director of water in the planetary systems, entered therein, and thus the living entity has the facility to taste everything with his tongue. So when there is water, that gives the one ability to tongue, which is controlled by the deity Varuna. Nirbinne Ashvinau na ase Vishnur avishatam padam घ्राणेन अंशेन गंधस्य प्रतिपत्तिर यथो भवेत.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, can I read?
Yes, Mataji.
Nirbhinne, thus being separated, Ashvinau, the 12 Ashwinis, Nase of the 2 nostrils, Vishnoho of the Lord, Avishatam entering, Padam post, by partially smelling, Gandhasya aroma, experience, upon Bhavet becomes. Thank you.
Thank you. The next verse says there's not going to be much of a purport, so I want everyone to be ready so that you can be reading the word, the word to words. Translation: when the Lord's 2 nostrils separately manifested themselves, the dual Ashwini Kumaras entered them in their proper positions, and because of this, the living entities can smell the aromas of everything. So first we saw the manifestation of Agni, and then we saw Varuna, and here we see the Ashwini Kumaras who are responsible for the nostrils. Nirbinne Akshini Twashta Lokapalo Vishad Vibhoho Chakshusha Angshena Rupanang Pratipattir Yatho Bhavet.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Nirbinne, thus being separated, Akshini, the eyes, the Vastha, the sun, Lokapala, director of light, Avishtha entered Viboho of the great Chakshu Amshena by the part of the eyesight, Rupanam of the forms, Pratipatihi experience Yataha by which Bhavet becomes. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thereafter, the two eyes of the gigantic form of the Lord were separately manifested. The sun, the director of light, entered them with the partial representation of eyesight, and thus the living entities can have vision of forms. So we see that the next manifestation is the Surya, by which we are able to see Rupa. We saw earlier Gandha, which is represented by the Ashwini Kumaras, and now we are seeing Rupa as to how they manifest. We see that, like for example, there is an object. Now everything is there in front of me. Why am I able to see all of these objects? Because there is light. Not because I have eyes, I can see everything, right? Unless there is light, I will not be able to see what is even if, Srila Prabhupada gives the example, even if you have your hands right in front of you, you cannot see your hands if there was no light. Of course, today light is an artificial contact, but where does the energy come from? Originally, the energy comes from Surya Deva or sun. So unless there is sun entering partially into the eyesight, then there is no possibility of one being able to see anything, even though it might be right in front of him or her. So that is the whole point. So he becomes the Adidaiva, the one who gives us the ability to see. Nirbhinnani asya charmani, lokapalo anilo vishat, pranena angshena sangsparsham yenashau pratipadyate.
Hare Krishna. Nirbhinnani, being separated, asya of the gigantic form, Charmani, skin, Lokapalaha, the director, Anilaha, air, Avishat entered, Pranena, Amsena, the part of the breathing, Samsparsham, touch, Ena, by which Ashav, the living entity, Pratipadyate, can experience. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Then there is the manifestation of the potency of touch, which is experienced by the skin, which is the separated from the gigantic form. And the deity is who? Anila, who is the deity directing the wind, who gives us that ability to the touch. Here, Srila Prabhupada gives the word as sangsparsha, or which is realized tactile knowledge. They say that, when you touch your mobile phone, you feel the tactile effect, that when you touch each key, there is a little bit of a vibration by which you can feel the touch, right? There is a sparsha that happens, that comes from that. At the same, let's say if your hand, if you put it in the refrigerator and it becomes frozen, and then you touch something, then nothing happens. Your touch is not felt by the mobile phone or anything. Or even if you touch somebody else, nothing happens. Or if there is no circulation of blood, if everything is frozen inside your body, if you touch, will you be able to feel anything? Even if somebody touches that place, you won't feel anything, right? It's become completely numb, right? And so that ability of sparsha is given by the form of Anila, the deity directing the wind. Text number 17. Karnav asya vinirbinnau dishnyam swam vivishur dishaha strotrena angshena sabdasya siddhim yena prapaddate.
Hare Krishna, Dandavata Pranams. Karnau the years, Asya of the gigantic form, Vinir Bhinnam, being thus separated, Dishnyam, the controlling deity, Swam own, Vivushuhu entered, Dishaha of the directions, Srotrena Amshena with the hearing principles, Sabdashya of the sound, Siddhim perfection, Yena by which Prapatyate is experienced. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. And then here now the sound, that is the ability to hear, that is being given. And who is the deity who's controlling it? Who are the deities of the different directions, right? So when the ears of the gigantic form became manifested, all the controlling deities of the different directions entered into them with the hearing principles, by which all the living entities hear and take advantage of sound. The ear is the most important instrument in the body of the living entity. Sound is the most important medium for carrying the message of distant and unknown things. The perfection of all sound or knowledge enters through the ear and makes one's life perfect. The entire Vedic system of knowledge is received by oral reception only, and thus sound is the most important source of knowledge. So this ability of hearing is enabled by the deity of the deities or the controlling deities of the different directions. Text number 18. Tvacham asya vinirbinnam vivishur dishnyam oshadihi angsena romabihi kandum yair ashau pratipadyate.
Hare Krishna. Twakam, skin, asya of the gigantic form, binirvinnam, being separately manifested. Bibishu, who entered, Dishnyam, the controlling deity, Asadihi, Amshe, with parts, Roma Bihi, through the hairs of the body, Kundum, itching, Eihi, by which Asau, the living entity, Pratipadyate, experiences. Hare Krishna.
And then Hare Krishna. So, and then there is further the one is the sparsha, but then even in the sparsha, there is different abilities that are, perceived, right? How, simply by the touch, one can feel, either happiness or irritation, right? Both is possible, right? If somebody touches you, you feel, you shake hands with somebody who's a good friend of you, then what happens? You feel good feeling, you feel very energetic. Sometimes you go and touch somebody whom you don't like. It's the same touch, it's the same hand, but then you feel a sense of irritation. How is that possible, right? So these are all enabled. Of course, if you go and talk to, the so-called modern doctors, they will say, there is a particular hormone that is, what is it? They call it a certain hormone. When you feel happy, there is a certain hormone that is generated. And then when you feel distressed, then there is a deficiency of that hormone or the increase of a certain other hormone and so on and so forth. So when there was a separate manifestation of skin, the controlling deities of sensations and their different parts entered into it, and thus the living entities feel itching and happiness due to touch. For sense perception, there are two principal items, touch and itching, and both of them are controlled by the skin and hairs on the body. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the controlling deity of touch is the air passing within the body. And the controlling deity of the hairs on the body is Oshadya. For the skin, the object of perception is touch, and for the hairs on the body, the object of perception is itching. So Srila Prabhupada is essentially quoting from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, differentiating the earlier one where there is the sparsha and then there is the sensation of itching or happiness, which are two different, but they are part of the touch principle. So that he is differentiating it here. Text number 19. Medrang tasya vinirbinnam swa dishnyam ka upavishat retasangsena yenasho anandam pratipadyate.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes, Mataji, go ahead.
Medharam, genitals, tasya of the gignatic form, vinirvinnam, being separated, dishnayam, own position, kaha brahma, the original living creature, upavishat, entered, ritasa ameshena, with the part of the semen, yena, by which asau, the living entity, anandam, sex pleasure, pratipadyate, experiences.
Hare Krishna. So when the genitals of the gigantic forms separately became manifest, then Prajapati, the original living creature, entered into them with his partial semen, and thus the living entities can enjoy sex pleasure. So that pleasure by which one is able to produce, that is given by Prajapati. And who's Prajapati? Prajapati is the one who is responsible for reproduction, or the, how he manifests the various prajas, and he is the pati of all the prajas. Text number 20. Gudang pungso vinirbinnam mitro lokesha avishat payunang sena yenasho visargam pratipadyate.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Gudam, evacuating outlet. Pumsa of the Janjatic form. Virbhinbannam, being separately manifested. Mitra, the sun god. Loka Isaha, the director called named Mitra. Avisat entered. Panuya Amsena, with the partial evacuation process. Yena, by which. Asau, the living entity. Visargam, evacuation. Pratiprapate, perform. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So the evacuating channel separately became manifest, and the director named Mitra, Yen Mitro Varunaha, we say, right? Mitra is one of the devatas. So he is the one who controls the evacuation process. That when we have to evacuate either urine or pass stool, all of this is controlled. We see that sometimes some people do not have a very good function of how they can, they have constipation or they cannot pass urine properly sometimes. And sometimes we see that when somebody becomes old, they're not able to do these functions. That is because they do not have in their whatever the kundali, the chart, where the mitra's position is not strong, it's being aspected by somebody else. And so when that thing is not powerful, then what happens is they have these deficiencies in health, where and then what they do is, of course, ultimately we see that that's the whole purpose of this chapter and the previous chapter. The ultimate potency comes from the Supreme Lord. And when one worships the Supreme Lord, then you don't have to go and worship independently each one of these deities, so that all our functions are happening very nicely. That's the beauty. Huh? The beauty is that, oh, my passing stool is not okay. Now I'll go and worship Mitra, and then I'll worship Varuna, then I'll worship this, I worship that. Can you go and worship 33,000 crore demigods like that? So the process is so simple that if one worships Krishna, so if one simply has intelligence, they can very easily understand this whole principle as to how the whole creation functions, simply by pleasing the Lord. And so Srimad Bhagavatam concludes by saying that some siddhir haritoshanam, that if simply one tries to please Hari, then everything will happen within not only within our body, everything that happens within ourselves and outside ourselves, everything will happen so nicely. So the evacuating channel separately became manifest, and the director named Mitra entered into it with partial organs of evacuation. Thus the living entities are able to pass stool and urine. Text number 21. Hastavasya vinirbhinnav indraha swar patir avishat vataya angsena purusho yena vrittim prapaddate.
Hare Krishna. Hastau, hands, asya of the gigantic form, Vinirbhinnau, being separately manifested, Indraha, the king of heaven, Swapatihi, the ruler of heavenly planets, Avishat, entered into it, Varthaya Amshena, with partial mercantile principles, Purushaha, the living entity, Yaya, by which Vrithim, business of livelihood, Prapatyate, transacts. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thereafter, when the hands of the gigantic form separately became manifest, Indra, the ruler of the heavenly planets, entered into them, and thus the living entity is able to transact business for his livelihood. So basically, when you have your hands, you can do everything. Whatever your mind thinks and your body wants, you're able to transact that in terms of. So he says, Vartaya. Vartaya means the business, or Varta. Varta means to conduct something, or to there's some kind of an exchange, a transaction. So it says the business transaction for livelihood, that is happening through your hastav, and that is enabled by Indra, who is the Swaha Patihi, the ruler of heavenly planets, which means because he is addressing the devatas, he says Swapatihi, who is your ultimate Indra. Padav asya vinirbhinnau lokesho Vishnu-ravishat gatya swangsena purusho yaya prapyam prapaddate.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Padav, the legs. Sorry, Mataji wants to read.
It's okay, Mataji. Go ahead.
Padav, the legs, Asya of the gigantic form, Vinirbhinnau, being manifested separately, Loka Ishaha Vishnuhu, the demigod Vishnu, not the personality of Godhead, Avisat, entered, Gatya, by the power of movement, Swa Amshena, with his own parts, Purushaha, living entity, Yaya, by which Prapyam, destination, Prabhatyate, reaches. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare
Thank you.
Krishna. Thereafter, the legs of the gigantic form separately became manifest, and the demigod named Vishnu, not the personality of Godhead, entered with partial movement. This helps the living entity move to his destination. So the movement is enabled by the personality of Vishnu. Srila Prabhupada here differentiates this personality. You know, when we say the maintainer, the creator, and the destructor of this material world are the three forms of Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. So that Vishnu form, who is the representation of a demigod, who is of course non-different from the Supreme Lord, but here Srila Prabhupada says not the personality of Godhead, meaning is different from the Mahavishnu or the Karanodakashaya Vishnu or the Garbhodakashaya Vishnu or the Shirodakashaya Vishnu. He is the one who represents the, we have Sattva, Raja, and Tamogun. Tamogun represented by Shiva, and then Rajogun represented by, Brahma, and then we have Vishnu representing the Sattva Guna. So essentially, but that does not mean that Lord Vishnu, who is the Devata, he is controlled by Sattva Guna or he is in Sattva Guna. Vishnu is always in his platform as Vishnu, which is above all the gunas, because the Lord is never, is in one sense nirguna. The word nirguna means that that he is not within the control of the gunas. So that one has to understand. But however, to differentiate him from the personality of Godhead, which is the Purusha avatar, so here Srila Prabhupada says not the personality of God. So he entered with partial movement. This helps the living entity move to his destination. So the movement is enabled by the Vishnu form of the Lord. Text number 23. Buddhim chasya vinirbinnam vag isho dishnyam avishad bodena angsena bodhavyam pratipattir yatho bhavet.
Hare Krishna. Buddhim, intelligence, cha also, asya of the gigantic form, vinirvinnam, being separately manifested, vak ishaha, Brahma, Lord of the Vedas, Dishyam, the controlling power, Avishat, entered in, Bodhena Amshena, with his part of intelligence, Bodhayam, the matter of understanding, Pratipatihi, understood, Yataha, by which, Bhavet, so becomes. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So when the intelligence of the gigantic form separately became manifest, Brahma, the Lord of the Vedas, entered into it with the partial power of understanding, and thus an object of understanding is experienced by the living entities. So the ability to, you're able to see the form, you're able to hear about the form. So we saw that there is the seeing ability and then there is the hearing ability. And then you're able to touch the form. All this is fine. But then you still should be able to understand the form. Like sometimes you see that when somebody is in a semi-state of coma, they're able to see, they're able to perceive it, they're able to hear about it, but they still do not understand what it is. So there is the differentiation of the ability to understand. And that is enabled by the ability of Brahma. And he says Vak Ishaha, which means there is the Vak Devi or the Vak Devata, and the Isha of that Vak Devi is Brahma. And so here he says, when the intelligence of the gigantic form separately became manifest, Brahma, the Lord of the Vedas, entered into it with a partial power of understanding, and thus an object of understanding is experienced by the living entities. Text number 24. Hrudayam chasya nirbinnam chandrama dishnyam avishad manasa angshena yenasho vikriyam pratipaddate.
Hare Krishna. Hridayam, heart, cha also, asya of the gigantic form, nirbinnam, being manifested separately, Chandrama, the moon demigod, Dishnam, with controlling power, Abhishat, entered into, Manasam Sena, partly with mental activity, Yena, by which Asau, the living entity, Vikriyam, resolution, Pratipatyate, transacts. Hare Krishna.
So after that, the heart of the gigantic form separately manifested itself, and into it entered the moon demigod with partial mental activity. And thus the living entity can conduct his mental speculations. So the ability to mentally think, generally when we say think, We only refer to the brain like this. Kya, nothing, it is not working or what? People just refer to the head. But here the representation is that Hridayam, right? The scientists, they identify the mind as to be here. Maybe the storage of it is here, but it interacts with the heart, and so it is in the heart region. So it's very difficult to understand as to how physically identify the mind. So it is in that region. So we can understand by this statement that actually it is in that. That's why I say Hridayesh, when we hear something, Bhavanti Hrit Karna Rasayana Kata, that is the process of meditation or the process of being able to do smaranam happens in the heart region, because that is where the function of the mind is there. That is why if you see, if somebody has moon planet very strong in their chart, their ability to mentally able to take decisions, analytically take decisions is very high, right? And we also see that, they call, if somebody is out of their mind, they call him lunatic. Why? They call lunatic because luna means lunar, which is moon, which means the ability to think is controlled by moon. And we also see that we are, today is Ekadasi, right? Why is Ekadasi important? It is because it is Ekdash, means it is 11. On Ekadasi, what happens? The moon is the controller of two positions. One is the mind and the other one is the heart. Even now I'm so used when I'm saying mind, I'm saying here and heart, but actually the mind and heart are here. So the moon god is the one who controls it. So what happens on the 11th day of the month, when the moon travels through the so-called solar system, it comes and sits in its own house on that particular day, the Ekadasi day, which is today, technically, for this cycle, right? So when he is sitting in his own place, what happens? He's very peaceful, because let's say if you are a salesman and if you are on journey, every time you're traveling, you're going here, you have to catch the flight, you have to do this, you have to eat there, you do everything. But when you come back home, what happens? You feel at peace, right? Finally I'm back, no more travel, it's weekend or whatever it is, right? Similarly, when the moon travels back and is seated in its own house, in its own place, it is very peaceful. So that day when it is peaceful for the moon, it is very convenient or conducive atmosphere for the mind to be able to think in a very clear way without any agitation. So that day is recommended for upavas. Upavas means to stay closer to Krishna. Upavas, to be closer to Krishna. So if one meditates on that particular day, right, which is on Ekadasi day, what happens? One will be able to get closer to the Lord, which means he will be able to concentrate more by the ability of mind to, somehow focus on the Lord and meditate and do smarana on that day. That is why Ekadashi is followed. Now, there can be, moon is calm, but then if you simply activate all of your other functions of your body by eating a lot of things on that particular day, then what happens? Even though the moon is calm, every other function of your body is agitated. That will not allow you to think properly. So what is recommended? Fasting is recommended on that day. If you fast on that day, what happens? You are also giving rest to all other functions, because the mind function is restful. It has to do its activity efficiently. So let us all help the mind function to do its activity of smarana very nicely. Upavas. That is the idea of upavas. Then what we found out? Oh, Ekadasi, fine. No grains, no, whatever this. Let's do 56 items with grains. We'll do Ekadasi pasta, Ekadasi pista, Ekadasi cake. We'll do all of those items and have full. In Tamil, they say Ekadasi means fal agar, means fal means fruit. That is the one that we are supposed to take. There's also another word in Tamil, it's called phalagaram. Phalagar becomes palagaram, means many different items are there that we are eating on that. So one has to reduce the amount of eating that one does on that day, so that you can enable the faculty of thinking, which is in its prime state because of the moon being in its rest state. that one will be able to perform smarana of the Lord or stay closer to the Lord or do activities that are associated with the Lord more mindfully. So that is the idea of this. So that we can see that after that, the heart of the gigantic form separately manifested itself, and into it entered the moon demigod with partial mental activity, and thus the living entity conduct his mental speculations. Text number 25. Atmanang chasya nirbhinnam abhimano vishat padam karmana angsena yena asho kartavyam pratipadyate.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna. God,
Okay,
Mataji, God.
Prabhuji, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Atmanam, false ego, cha also asya of form, nirbhinnam, being separately manifested, abhimanna, false identification, avisat, entered, padam, in position, karmanna, activities, amsen, part, yana, by which, asau, the living entity, kartavyam, objective activities, pratipadyate, takes in. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thereafter, the materialistic ego of the gigantic form separately manifested itself, and to it entered Rudra, the controller of false ego, with his own partial activities by which the living entity transacts his objective actions. What does it mean? We do a particular activity. One can do that activity in various ways. How he can do it in the mode of passion, in the mode of goodness, in the mode of tama, which is ignorance. Generally, we call it attitude is important. Attitude defines your altitude, they say, right? So in a similar way, the attitude is defined by this, that when you perform an action, how you perform the action, in what vigor you perform the action, with what attention you perform an action, how efficiently you perform an action. Sometimes you can be very lazy in performing an action. Sometimes you can be very vigorous. And so that vigor or the attitude to perform an action in an objective way, that is given by the so here he says, thereafter the materialistic ego of the gigantic form separately manifested itself, and into it entered Rudra, the controller of false ego, with his own partial activities by which the living entity transacts his objective actions. Purport: the false ego of materialistic identity is controlled by the demigod Rudra, an incarnation of Lord Shiva. So we see that Lord Shiva is the one who expands into the 11 Rudras. So that is the Rudra form that is mentioned here. Rudra is the incarnation of the Supreme Lord who controls the mode of ignorance within the material nature. The activities of the false ego are based on the objective of the body and mind. Most persons conducted by the false ego are controlled by Lord Shiva. When one reaches a finer version of ignorance, he falsely thinks of himself as the Supreme Lord. That egoistic conviction of the conditional soul is the last snare of illusory energy, which controls the entire material world. So here, Srila Prabhupada says that that attitude broadly can be classified into two attitudes. One attitude is the attitude that I am the doer. Prakrite kriyamanani gunaya karmani sarvasaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti mannate. So one living entity can think, because of his ahankara, false ego, that kartaham, I am the doer. But the I am the doer itself can be in different levels, which can be a person who is in sattva can also think I am the doer. A person in ignorance can also think I am the doer. A person in rajas can also think I am the doer. So all of them come in the same category, right? Kartaham. But then there is another activity which is without that. That is, oh, I don't think I am the karta. It is the Supreme Lord who is the karta. Then he has transcended all these three modes, and he is not acting out of false ego, but out of real ego. That is also enabled. So we can see that how Lord Shiva facilitates every living entity. Either you can be in this part where you can think I am the doer and then act in illusion, or you can come out of illusion, give up false ego. That is also facilitated by him. So that can be facilitated. So we can see how Lord Shiva facilitates this. That egoistic conviction of the conditioned soul is the last snare of the illusory energy, which controls the entire material world. Text number 26. Satvang cha asya vinirbinnam mahan dishnyam upavishat chittena angsena enasho vijnanam pratipadyate.
Hare Krishna. Sattvam, consciousness, cha also asya of the gigantic form, vinirvinnam being separately manifested, maham the total energy mahatattva, dishnyam with control, upaveshat entered into chittena amshena along with his part of consciousness, ena by the living entity, vijnanam specific knowledge, pratipadyate cultivates. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. The translation. Thereafter, when his consciousness separately manifests itself, the total energy Mahatattva entered with his conscious part. Thus, the living entity is able to conceive specific knowledge. Now, everything is there in the machine like a car. You know, there is a horn in the car, there is a brake in the car, there is an accelerator in the car, there is a clutch in the car, and then there are switches to open the doors, there are switches to close the doors. All of these things are there. But when that same car is sitting in the garage without, functioning, then what happens? It's as good as dead. But as soon as the driver is sitting there in the car, what happens? The car becomes fully active. How? This car is switched on, the lights are happening, when you move the side lights are happening, and the wiper is going, and then the horn is going, and then everything is functional completely. But if the driver was not in the driver's seat, it's as good as a dead car. So similarly, all of the functions that have been given earlier, they are all there, but if the consciousness is not there in the body, that body is as good as a dead body. And who is that consciousness? That consciousness is the Supreme Lord in the form of Mahatattva. He says, thereafter, when his consciousness separately manifested itself, the total energy Mahatattva entered with his conscious part. Thus, the living entity is able to conceive specific knowledge. Text 27, Sirshno asya dhyau dhara padbhyam khang naber udapadyata. Gunanang vrittayo yeshu pratiyante suradayah.
Hare Krishna. Srishnaha, head, Ashya of the gigantic form, Dyauhu, the heavenly planets, Dhara, earthly planets, Padhyam, on his legs, Kam, the sky, Nabhi, from the abdomen, Udapadyatha became manifested, Gunanam, of the three modes of nature, Vrittayaha, reactions, Yeshu, in which Pratiyante, manifest, Sura Adayaha, the demigods and others. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thereafter, from the head of the gigantic form, the heavenly planets were manifested, and from his legs, the earthly planets, and from his abdomen, the sky separately manifested themselves. Within them, the demigods and others also were manifested in terms of the modes of material nature. So here he gives about how the various planetary systems, the 14 planetary systems, became manifest from the head of the gigantic form. Text number 28. Atyantikena satvena divang devaha prapedire darang rajah swabhavena panayo yecha tan anu.
Hare Krishna. Atyantikena, excessive, satvena, by the mode of goodness, divam, in the higher planets, devaha, the demigods, prapedire, have been situated, dharam, on the earth, rajaha, the mode of passion, swabhavena, by nature, panayaha, the human being, ye, all those, cha, also, tan, there, subordinate. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. The demigods, qualified by the super excellent quality of the mode of goodness, are situated in the heavenly planets, whereas the human beings, because of their nature in the mode of passion, live on the earth in company with their subordinates. In Bhagavad Gita 14:14-15, it is said that those who are highly developed in the mode of goodness are promoted to the higher planets, heavenly planetary systems, and those who are overpowered by the mode of passion are situated in the middle planetary systems, the earth and the similar planets. But those who are surcharged with the mode of ignorance are degraded to the lower planetary systems or to the animal kingdom. The demigods are highly developed in the mode of goodness, and thus they are situated in the heavenly planets. Below human beings are the animals, although some of them mingle with human society, cows, horses, dogs, etc., are habituated to living under the protection of human beings. The word Atyantikena is very significant in this verse. By development of the mode of goodness of material nature, one can become situated in the heavenly planets. But by excessive development of the modes of passion and ignorance, the human beings indulges in killing the animals who are meant to be protected by mankind. Persons who indulge in unnecessary animal killing have excessively developed in the modes of passion and ignorance and have no hope of advancing to the mode of goodness. They are destined to be degraded to lower statuses of life. The planetary systems are calculated as upper and lower in terms of classes of living entities who live there. So Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, Urdhvam gacchanti sattvasto madhye tishtanti rajasa jaganni gunavrittista ado gacchanti tamasa. He says, also in this verse, he says, Yada satve pravruddhetu pralayang yati dehabhrut tadhottama vidham lokan amalan pratipadyate. Rajasi pralayang gatva karma sangishu jayate tata pralinastamasi muda yonishu jayate. So if somebody is in the mode of tamasi, he goes into muda yonishu jayate, which means into an illusory yoni from where he is born, which means basically animal kingdom or hellish planets. Rajasi pralayam gatva karma sangishu jayate. They get into the planet of the karmas, which is the middle planetary systems where there is activity, a lot of activity, but there is very limited results. But if you are in the Yada Satve Pravruddhetu Pralayam Yati Dehabrit Tada Uttama Vidham Lokan, they go to the Uttama Vidham Lokan or the Amalan Pratipadyate, which means the planets of the pure or the sages, which means the higher planetary systems, which is Bhuvaha Swaha Maha Tapaha Janaha Satya Lokas. Those planets they go to. How? By being in the mode of Sattva Guna. One can go there. So, anybody by developing those qualities of Sattva, Raja and Tamo can traverse in this way either to the higher planetary systems or the lower planetary systems. So that is the word representing Atyantikena is very significant because the development of the mode of goodness of material nature, one can become situated at the heavenly planet. So it is possible to go to the higher planetary systems by simply developing a mode of goodness. I'll stop here. Hari Om Tat Sat. Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Samaved Gaur Bhakta ki jai. Bhona Mangal Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Sattila Ekadasi Mahotsav ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.